Hi, folks. I'm BK. I am the director of the Pennsylvania Park Maintenance Institute. Um, we've introduced the concept of the Institute early this year. And as I started trying to do some promotion and get some materials out there, I started getting into the NRPA Connect world. And that is where our presenter today, Drew Daxon, reached out to me. He is the inventor of the Base Buddy X1 underground system. So he's going to talk a little bit about how we can think about pre-game infield maintenance, but it's going to be, instead of from the supervisory or the management side, this is going to be an approach looking at it from an actual end user. Drew spent years playing baseball. He made it through Division I baseball himself and eventually transitioned into a role in youth baseball as a coach. And so today we're going to have Drew share his perspective of being a coach using fields, but also sharing with us some of that relationship between the field managers and the field users and how we can best utilize volunteers. And sometimes as a field manager, we find that the coaches may be a problem for us. And so what are some of the approaches we can take to create good relationships and share best practices with our coaches so that they don't create more work for us? But also he's going to share with us some concepts of how we can best utilize our fields and make them a little bit more of a profit maker for us, because in the current environment, we may not have had as many teams playing on our fields because they may not have been allowed to, or we have maintenance issues that we're very concerned about our budgets, and we may have to rely more on volunteers to help us keep things up. And so today, Drew is going to share with us his perspective from the user side, and he's going to share with us some ideas of how we can move forward in today's environment. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Drew Daxon.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. A lot of this information I'm going to go over, there's probably stuff you already know, but I'm just going to try and give it to you guys from that user perspective. I've never worked in Parks and Recreation before, so some of the challenges you guys might face might be different than what we face, but if we can collaborate, I think a lot of this stuff will seem beneficial for both of us, because it'll increase your field use, which we all need in this current climate, because youth sports was coming back with a passion, even in this crazy climate we're in. But as far as you guys are concerned, there's some exciting opportunities for you with field use and how you can actually increase your profitability in using those fields. So I went ahead and shared my screen, so let's just go over it. Well, again, a lot of this stuff probably won't be new to you guys, but just trying to give you a little bit different perspective on the matter. So again, I'm Drew Daxon. I'm the inventor and CEO of Base Buddy. We're a small startup here out of Colorado, and a lot of this information is going to be based on what we're doing locally here with fields. But you know, I imagine it's pretty consistent across the board. So a quick overview of what we're going to be going over. There we go. So I'll try to make this as fast as possible, but we'll have an opportunity for you guys to ask questions at the end here. If I skip over something too fast, just keep that in your mind. We can skip back and address it in more depth once we get there. So first and foremost, I wanted to go over process and procedure. So for us as a field user or us as a volunteer coach, the number one issue that we face is the amount of time it goes into coaching, and a lot of that comes from the field's not being ready for use. So we usually have to arrive about an hour and a half to even 2 hours before the game or practice. Not so much practice, but for games, especially for the first game of the day. That being, we want to work with our kids for an hour prior to the game. And very rarely do we get to do that if the field's not ready to go. So with youth coaches, there's maybe only 1 up to 3 coaches that are available on each team. And if one of us is lost, especially at say 8, 9, 10 years old, you got kids going crazy and there's no baseball logic or anything being taught. It's just that kind of a daycare. So where it concerns you guys is us as coaches. If a field's not prepared, we have to drag that field And that'll come, I'll address a little bit more as to the safety aspect later on in the presentation. But what we typically do is if there's an access point, we bring our cars onto the field to get it done in a quick, timely fashion. And we know you guys hate that. So unauthorized vehicles on the field can be a huge problem simply because, you know, we're concerned with getting the drag, the field drag, the surface ready for play, and not so much how it could impact your field or maintenance of that field. It's very time consuming, and for a lot of coaches, their grandpas, dads that are out of shape, it's pretty physically demanding to get done in a timely fashion. So we arrive a lot earlier than we can. A lot of us have full-time jobs, so it can be very frustrating if we arrive to a field and it's not dragged. Second, and probably the most frustrating of all, is the setting of the bases. You can see a picture here that I put on this. This was only about a week ago. You can see in one guy's hand, they actually brought out a metal detector because they cannot find the settings. If you don't have a tape measure on hand, if you don't have a dig tool, this process has taken us up to 45 minutes to complete. And by the time you're done, you're screaming at your kids as opposed to just going out there to coach. This is something that we'll focus on a little bit further in the presentation because this is where we as Base Buddy have tried to simplify the process. But as you can see here, there's up to 15 anchors sunk in your fields across all different levels of play. Finding these or finding the accurate one is a process. When you find it, having to dig those out, if you don't have the proper tools, can take 15, 20 minutes. I've broken fingernails, I've broken keys, I've had to get kids to go in there with the little fingers. It's a really frustrating process. So anything we can do to help coaches find their base locations easily is a huge value add because it allows us to show up to the field closer to game time or actually work with our kids for a longer period of time. It also makes sure that we have the right base setting set. This is one that if you've ever coached and you find an anchor, you get excited, you put the bases in. We've gone as far as the second inning realizing we don't have the right bases set for our age group. So this is one that we'll touch on a little bit later, as this is where Base Buddy can maybe help you guys. This is the entire focus of our business. So next is the pitching mound. This one is also extremely frustrating and time consuming. As you can see, there's even more pitching distances to choose from than there are base settings. Then you have the added component of there's an elevated mound at a certain age level. So if you don't have one of these portable mounds, or if you dedicate a certain field to X level of play or higher, it's a challenge. For cities, you guys tend to use them for softball. It's a huge adult softball. And then a lot of times you'll embed a mound. What you may not know is that, or maybe you are and there's no other solution, and I'd love to collaborate with you on that at the end here. But usually that embedded mound is in a stride distance for certain age groups where it becomes a safety hazard. So we ran into it in 10 through 12 where we had kids striding onto that embedded mound. And us as volunteers, we had dads that, were so frustrated with it, they yanked that mound out and created a huge obstacle for you guys to repair post-game. But what options do we really have if you have a kid that's trying to pitch and ends up in the splits multiple times when he's trying to pitch? So just became one of those things that we thought we want to make sure to address, as we may not have the solution, but we'd love to collaborate with you guys on a solution to make sure that's a safe thing and still able to utilize your fields for obviously what makes you guys money. Next is that I love this one. Chalking the foul lines is something that a lot of fields do, even if you don't set the bases, which we really appreciate. But the equipment is really expensive. It's a really time-consuming process, and there's nothing like being accused of being drunk when your foul line, looks like this. So as you chalk those foul lines, if you can do that for us for pregame, again, that saves us an enormous amount of time in the setup process, so that we don't have to arrive so early. And then finally, a lot of things that are just out of our control and things that you can help us with. Number one is unmowed or really wet grass in the outfield. Obviously, wet grass is not something you can control if it's raining, but if you could set your sprinkler times to more of the evening or post-game schedule, that's awesome for us. We go through baseballs like you couldn't believe in the event that that grass is really long and wet. The other thing is with water is the excessive water on the field. A lot of times we'll bring cat litter, which I know a lot of cities hate because you spend so much money on your mixtures in the infield. But it's, you know, it's quick, it's accessible, and we'll just throw down cat litter on top of a puddle and try to get that raked out so that we can just play the game. And then the amenities. There's a lot of amenities that are kind of out of our control. There's a lot of siblings that come to ball games, and any outdated amenities with water fountains or bathrooms becomes a huge headache for us as coaches because they think that we are the person that goes. A lot of times that's totally out of our control. It goes through the cities and our organizations to bring that up with you guys. But anything you can do with outdated amenities. But a lot of it, when it comes to adult softball, it's these overflowing or really smelly trash cans, you know, the beer, that kind of stuff. And that's stuff that I know of clubs that will completely avoid using or renting fields in entirety just because they know they're not going to be clean for our youth ages. So just some things to keep in mind for those guys using the fields. If we can get those cleaned up, it's a huge value add. Next, so the tools and equipment for us as volunteers to get a field, the list is endless. I actually was known as the trailer because I had at least 2, if not 3 buggies that I would bring to set up the fields. And the tools are expensive. If you forget one at the field, you can basically guarantee you're not going to get it back. But these are kind of just the bare necessities for every single youth coach to have on hand to prepare a field for gameplay. So the dig tool to get just the bases set. I've gone through 10 of those in a season because somehow they find your way out of your cart and you just forget them. So I'm sure you guys have a million of them every year that you just throw in the shed and keep on hand, but they're not accessible to us, so we end up buying more and more and more. Bases, we are all required our own bases, that's fine, but the base stems can tend to vary in length, so if your anchors are in really bad condition, it's just more prep work for us. Measuring tapes, chalk line machines, portable mounds, rakes, and drags. This can add up to over $1,000, and it's all at a personal expense. So not sure if we can maybe collaborate on what cities do to make some of these accessible to renters prior to games, as long as there's maybe an agreement that they go back in certain storage areas. But this is just a partial lift. This doesn't include any of the gear, catcher's gear, and you know, baseballs and all that stuff that we have to carry to the games as well. So it'd be great if there was a collaboration we could do to maybe allow some of this stuff to be available. We don't mind setting up the fields, but when it comes to personal expenditures, this stuff gets pretty expensive. Couple interesting facts I wanted to present to you guys as we transition now to how it benefits you. According to a Google search, USA Today did a study in 2018, and we're seeing that anywhere from 15 to 25 million kids are using baseball fields between the ages of 6 and 12. Another interesting fact is that traditionally those were something that cities and municipalities had to sponsor, and that trend is rapidly declining. More and more we're seeing club sports take over, or travel sports take over, which vastly decreases the obligation for you guys to provide administration or staff to hold leagues. Tournaments, tournament play is a huge value add, and that's where it gets down to that third study. I've added links to each of these if you want me to send you this PDF so you can read these, but they're really interesting articles. Previously, for Little League, participation usually cost $300 to $500. Registration, jerseys, and a parade is really all you guys had to cover. But it was really an organizational burden because you had to coordinate and set the teams and all this, that, and the other. Now we're seeing a huge transition to club and travel with the participation at about $3,700 to $8,000 or more per season, and those fees are continuing to go up. There does not seem to be an end to how much people will pay for quality baseball or softball for that matter. So when you get into the field relationship with that, they want good fields on top of good coaching. So these fees don't seem to be an issue. If they have good fields and good coaches, we're turning kids away at $8,000 or more We're still having to hold tryouts. It's not like we're trying to fill roster spots. So I don't want you guys to think that, you can't ask us to pay a fair share for any amenities or things you add into your fields. You will book your fields as this trend continues to progress. So why is this all important to you guys? Again, it comes down to money. With 25 million kids participating, you have one of the biggest pools for revenue generation in any cross-platform or any market, and that's continuing to increase. With that, your responsibilities with organization and administration is decreasing. So it's just about maintaining the fields and creating a proper structure to rent those fields from local groups. The biggest thing that we're looking for with club or travel baseball is a partnership and a range of availability. Host like adult softball or in things that have been obviously huge money makers for a long time, but allowing us a chunk of time. Most clubs are supporting age levels between 6 and all the way through high school to 18 years old, and some are even expanding beyond that as more and more sports shift to club and away from schools. So don't be afraid to charge us whatever you need to create jobs within your departments to maintain these fields, because they will pay it, especially with the proper amenities. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but all club and travel teams actually carry their own liability insurance. So they're required to in most states. So that takes another aspect away from you, as their liability insurance covers, in most cases, and maybe some of you can clarify this for me in your state, usually covers any type of accident or injury that occurs on your field if they're playing for that club or organization. So another huge burden lifted. So it's something you don't have to worry about when you're being the organizer. And then field amenities. A lot of things can add to this. Obviously good bathrooms, the proper trash cans. One thing that's been hugely valuable in the area, and this field you can't find times, it's booked almost, it seemed like 24/7, but they added trees along the sideline. Something simple, trees, but it creates a shade opportunity for them, but it also creates a safety aspect, because stray foul balls get caught up in those trees 9 times out of 10. So something to consider. It's just one of those things that nobody would have thought putting trees so close to the field was a good idea. Those fields, you cannot find availability on those fields. They're booked year-round. And a lot of it's because it's such a safe environment for the spectators. A lot of information here. Feel free to read through it yourself. I'm just going to focus on some of the safety aspect. I've already talked a little bit about, we're not so worried about the cost of the fields. We're worried about the condition and the amenities of those fields when we're looking for field use. So the main thing with safety, and this is just an interesting statistic I found, but according to the Andrews Institute, 44% or more of all facial fractures that were a result of baseball and softball. And I didn't find the specific number, but if you've been a coach, the large majority of those, I'd say 70% or more, are because of an imperfection in the playing surface, bad hop. You're not seeing kids missing balls hitting in the face as much. You're not seeing pitching or things happening in the field of play. It's not that physically impactful of a sport, but those bad hops will pop up as soon as a field's been in use for a little bit. And if you're playing 8 games in a day, that 8th game, it becomes a huge safety hazard to play on a field that has not been dragged after that much activity. So it's just one of those things to consider, that if we can get the right amenities and the right equipment into the field and are allowed to drag in between, or maybe have just 1 or 2 people on site to drag every other game, I think you'll see that number vastly decrease. Because again, it's just, as the more it's run, the more base paths get worn, the more likely you're going to have a ball pop up and hit a kid in the face. A couple other things to consider is the time consuming of the bases and the pitching mound that we've already covered. Without markers or plugs in those anchors, they're almost impossible to find. That's why a lot of people bring metal detectors to the field. And that's pretty much the top reason coaches burn out is, if you're working a full-time job, you just can't dedicate 2 hours a night, or really 4 hours a night to play one game. And that's mainly because it's so much time setting up the fields. And then again, the amenities. For spectators, I mean, friends, family, siblings, they want to have things to do at the field, especially if you're going to spend the entire day there. So the more you can add to your fields, playgrounds around the area, sunshades in the spectator area, concessions, huge thing is clean bathrooms, the more and more likely you're going to be able to book those fields and ask more for those fields without any pushback on that affecting the amount of time they're rented. So it's a huge revenue opportunity for you without any type of administrative obligation. As long as you can keep and maintain, those fields will get used. And then just a quick, background about us. We set out with the goal to fix the anchor solution. So without doing a sales pitch, I just wanted to throw this in here. Our product is the Base Buddy X1. We created an anchor that you do not have to dig out. During play, if you do get some dirt in there, it's very, very easy to maintenance. And the number one thing is you can actually throw a tracker in ours, like a tile or a chipolo, that you can actually ping with a smartphone, so that if it's buried, it'll chirp at you. And coaches can set that up, cities can set that up, maintenance teams can set that up so that they have access to them or can limit access to them. But our unit's designed to solve that one simple problem, and that's to allow the setup process to go a little bit faster and allow maintenance teams to not have to dedicate the field to one age group, or not be able to drag the field because of that problem. What you can do is plug ours right up, drag the field in between games, unplug them right back up, and get them ready for use again. So that's a little bit about us. I can email this information to anybody that's interested, but our company was founded on that problem, and that is that as a coach, I just didn't have the amount of time to spend at a field and set up a field on top of the requirements within coaching itself. So that's the entire reason that we're in existence, is that problem of the base anchors in the fields. So I know I talk fast, and I tried to get through that fast so we could ask any questions or turn it back over to Brian. But at that point, that's my spiel for right now.
Thank you, Drew. So, question just off the top of my head is, your installs that you've had so far, has the fields gone with all 5 base locations, or is there more common base placements that you have across the age groups?
So we actually, we set out with a vision to do a top-down. So I haven't worked with a ton of cities that have done the multiple base configurations. The max of one that we have right now is 3 out in Georgia. They seem to have really good feedback for us. But we wanted to do the college and high school down approach, because those guys, if they like the idea, have the ability to make that decision for their fields. The rest of us, we got to go through you guys. So with the most cities that we've done around here, it's 1 base configuration right now. They're enjoying them, so they probably will do more. They're working great. But the biggest thing is just when you get to 5 base settings, the installation becomes very key, because they are in the field of play. So you got to make sure you have the right amount of surface material over top. We designed our top to make sure that it was not a hazard, even if it was exposed. So a couple things there, but for right now, we've seen a maximum of 3 configurations being utilized, and that's a softball, a youth, and then the high school level.
And what are those distances?
So the 10 and so it's 50, 65, and 90. And then obviously second base, you have a very specific distance, and I have that graphic in there for most people but I believe the second base is one of those that it's 127 feet as the max, 99 feet, and 70.8 feet. So the second base is the biggest one, because you have to drag over those. So we have some installation techniques that we utilize to make sure that you guys do those without it ever becoming a factor in the field of play.
And with your clients that you've installed so far, what has the feedback been?
I really like them. As far as the clients that we have, it's created an ease of use. There are varying we're working with a number of base manufacturers because stems tend to vary. So the only negative feedback we've had so far is that some of the stems aren't long enough or are too long. And that's something to where it's pretty easy fix, as you can modify those stems pretty easily. But as far as our units being usable, we are working on our own proprietary tracker for Parks and Rec. We want to create a database that says, hey, you know, we're at a local field for us is Westminster Christopher Field. So you check into that complex, you say, oh, we're on field 3 and we're 12-year-olds. And automatically those sensors will start to ping. So that you can go in and set your bases real easy. For right now, being a startup, we're working with Tile, and you can just get those pretty much anywhere, Best Buy, Walmart, and you can just embed one of those. It limits the access right now to the maintenance teams or whoever is the owner of the field. We hope to expand that to the users as well, so that they can come to your field and say, hey, with a few simple clicks, their base anchors start to ping.
We have a question in the chat box. It's from Nathan Kane. It says, we have a complex with 6 fields that on some weekends we have all fields booked for tournaments. So kind of like you were saying, game times are not staggered and run from 8 a.m. till 10 p.m. Wow, that's a heck of a day. We drag before the start of games each day with our maintenance staff, but when there are only 10 minutes between games, how can you feasibly drag after games?
Well, that's one thing that with Base Buddy, it's possible because you simply remove the bases, plug your anchors, drag, and then go right back in and reset your anchors. We have multiple location methods, so if you can't use a chip, you can use a number of ropes or twine to our anchors so that you can find them again easily. But that was the whole idea behind our product is you can just simply plug them back up. I think maybe Nathan can shine a little bit more light if he's experienced the same problems, but I think your biggest concern is finding those anchors again after you drag and then preparing them for a base. It doesn't allow for a 10-minute interval. So we think that we've got a product that can solve that for you. But again, it requires you to have someone on site, and it requires you to have our anchors installed in order for you to do that in a timely process. The other aspect of that is if you do have multiple base settings, we've seen that it's opened the door for allowing you to play a 10-year-old game and then play an 11-year-old game right after it. Typically now you just leave the bases set for the entire day because it does take so long in between games to try to reset those if you're going to change the distances. We do not have a viable solution right now for the pitching mound. We're working on it. We're partnering with a number of pitching mound vendors and the portable mounds. But right now we're just focused on the base pass. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we have seen success in our anchors being able to just plug up, drag, and then open back up, and they're ready for play.
Nathan, did you want to go ahead and unmute yourself if you wanted to expand? All right, we'll take.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
So the concern that we have as far as the coach and renter expectation as far as dragging the fields, on our end, we have 2 workers on site at all times. So we've got manpower there. But if we have 4 games that all end at a 2-hour time limit at 10 a.m. and there's only 10 minutes between the next game or those games starting again, how can you feasibly drag 4 fields in 10 minutes when the expectation is that you drag after every 2nd or 3rd game? So currently we don't drag except for prepping for the day. So like you said, we'll set our bases for the day, whatever age groups they have playing on those fields. But I mean, there are times where we have all 6 fields that are in a transition period at the same time. So is it still a realistic expectation for us to drag, multiple fields? I mean, it might just be 1 field. That's not an issue. But when you're talking at two or more fields, trying to drag all of those within the same 10-minute span before the next game starts. When you have two people and one tractor and a hand drag, how is that? Any suggestions there as far as trying to meet that expectation, or is that even a realistic expectation from our renter?
If I could jump in there, personally speaking, and I can speak for a number of other coaches, and especially in our area, if you had extra drags on hand, we would use those drags. We would do it for you. It's that important to us to make sure that the field's in good condition for our kids. I don't think you would run across any problem that if you just added a couple drags and kept them close by, that you wouldn't have the assistant coaches or even parents in the stands grab those drags and do it for you. You could leave the bases in if the competition level's at the same distance, and we'll just go around the bases. The main concern is the shortstop area and the second base area are just beat to crap by the time the second game is played. So maybe a solution to that was, if the budget allows and you can have a couple extra drags on site, I don't think you'd have any issue with parents or coaches volunteering to do that for you with the right equipment. So a lot of times you'll notice that when a team comes out of the dugout and a team's coming into the dugout, there's people standing around. I can speak that I would have no problem as a coach or an assistant coach to grab one of those drags and do it myself, or even just the problematic areas. The rakes are a challenge because it's just not really as clean as a drag. So if you can get an affordable drag and leave it close by, I think that might be one way that you'd see that you could get that done in between games.
And that's one of the comments in the comment box from Dan Miller is, with increased revenue from tournaments, if you're having more play, potentially you can look to invest in more equipment like drags and brooms and other types of field equipment. And then, as you said, volunteers would be viable bodies to get the work done. I would ask, from your experience and the fields that you've used, has there been a relationship between the field managers and the teams to train how to properly drag and how to properly maintain the playing surface so that you're creating best practices as opposed to a hot mess?
Is that for Dan or for me?
For you.
No, not around here, and we would love that. If there was a basic training you could give to all head coaches within each club or organization. So say you did something like this even for a group of coaches within a particular club or organization you knew was going to use the fields, we'd disseminate that information to our coaches or our parents, no problem. Maybe one thing that we've considered before is access to a utility shed. Obviously, you'd need a list provided to you every season or even multiple times within that season, so you know who's going in and out of that facility or maintenance shed. But what I've found is there's really nothing that you can't ask us as volunteers that we're not willing to do, as long as we get a quality playing surface and we don't have to show up 2 hours in order to do it. So access to tools saves us money. It saves us time. So don't be afraid to ask. And if you get pushback during those training sessions, then obviously we can adjust, but never be afraid to ask, because a lot of us coaches are desperate or won't even volunteer anymore because we just know it's so time consuming, and there isn't really that direct link between us and you. Usually everything goes through the club or the top brass, so to speak, of the organization to you. And there's really seems to be no collaboration tool for us to talk directly with you. So something like this or maybe a quarterly training that we could attend would be hugely beneficial.
I can see Rebecca Octor in front of me. She's from Advanced Turf, and she also was a manager in Cranberry Township here in Pennsylvania. She's out there on the side of the state with Dan. I was wondering if maybe you could add some insight from your experience. I know you have a very robust maintenance plan in the past.
Sure, BK, no problem. You know, in listening to Drew, a lack of guidance from the field owners, be it a municipality, a school, privately owned, whatever they are, the onus is on those field owners to have a way to disseminate information to field users. So a lacking connection there should really fall to the field owners. An athletic field use policy, no matter who the owner is, super simple. I think we even have some examples of that in the tool shed, in the PPMI tool shed, explaining that coaches, leadership, whatever volunteer organizations have to go through a training and do have access to tools, or what the expectations are from the users. So field ownership can easily and should clearly lay that out to field users. I don't think that needs to be in question. That on that point,
How do you feel about the? I saw the picture of the vehicle on the field. Like, did you have you seen those experiences, and how do you manage, coaches and other things like that to maybe discourage that kind of behavior, or is it acceptable?
That's never acceptable ever. I mean, I could go on for 3 hours straight about the problems with that. But, again, tone sets at the top with field ownership. Again, be it municipality, school, private, wherever it is, you set a clear expectation, and cars on a field is never going to be one of them. If there's no voice from the owners of the field, whoever they may be, hey, have at it. I've seen a pickup truck drive a used mattress spring around a field. I've literally seen it. Not anywhere that I manage. Anywhere that has an unauthorized vehicle on a field is probably going to lose user benefits for the entire season, if not forever. I mean, but any user should know from the field owners that that's an egregious, breaking of the rules, for lack of a better way to put it. And that's a clear communication from owner to user. It shouldn't really be in doubt.
Now, Drew, from your experience as a player, do the players ever get involved into the aspects of helping to maintain their own playing surface, or are they only focused on playing and don't even realize how much work goes into the process?
That's a great question. Obviously, 12 and below, not even a thought in their head. Take a ground ball to the face, which usually occurs by the age of 12, they're willing to help. So, we've got kids, 2 or 3 kids pulling a drag, no problem. They'll do one sweep, we'll switch it off, gets their legs loose, because it is a challenging thing to do by hand. Some of those drags can be pretty heavy. That smaller one I included in there is an easy one to do with 1 or 2 kids. It's not heavy at all, but it's not real wide, so you got to do a lot of sweeps. But again, don't be afraid. You'd be amazed what we're willing to do for that playing surface. We want it to be pristine. If it's a wet day, we have no problem doing it during, before an inning starts, just giving it a once over. So yes, at the certain age levels, you got kids that are willing to jump on a drag, and we'll make it a competition. So you can get done, the fastest, and make sure that the entire, or the main areas are dragged, in under a couple minutes, so that it just happens in between innings, or if it's before a game, it's no problem. Grab a rake and rake out your position, anything. One thing I want to stress is there's really nothing us as a participant, player, coach, parent won't do if we have access to the equipment. So, in our area, we really don't have access to a lot. There's very, very few people that have access to the maintenance shed. And with our organizations being so broad in the age range, and so many teams, I mean, one of our local organizations has 58 teams this year. So as let's say the owners of the organization, they're very rarely on site. So if they have access to it, they're not providing us access to it. So they've said is, maybe this is some things that are limited to our area, or maybe poor management on the field parts. But as far as the user of the field, we're willing to do kind of whatever. Obviously, the higher the rates go, the more we kind of expect when we rent those fields. But if we have access to a drag, we're going to use that drag probably multiple times during our time slot.
Do you often maintain or find the need to maintain even for practices? You did mention it's mainly gameplay and tournament play are the biggest points, but from your experience, have you shown up to playing surfaces that just weren't even ready to practice on and you couldn't, even though you are paying for that kind of rental costs and things like that?
More often than I can count. For some reason, if it's, we usually clarify if it's practice or game, and for some reason, if we clarify it's practice, it's usually a lower rental fee, but it's not prepared. We've had the dried mud issue where you got footprints that are an inch deep from somebody walking their dog across the field, and now you go out to practice and you've got literally an obstacle that you're worried about, so you can't use third base because somebody trudged through there with their with a muddy field. So a lot of this stuff, obviously, maybe can be clarified with expectations from the field user as to what to expect. But again, we would be happy as a user or a renter to drag it if we had access to one, even for practice.
And this is kind of an open question to anyone involved. Please feel free to unmute your mic and jump in. But, what are some of the examples we may be using for some of these contracts or expectation outlines? Where can we find? I've been digging a lot of the materials up and putting it into our tool shed for the Institute, but where are some of your concepts coming from, and where are some of your tools that you have found? Major League Baseball or Little League, or where are we finding these resources?
Is that one for me as well?
Oh. You can start, sure.
No, I'm leaning on you guys a little bit for this one, because I've never been on that side of things. So I'd love to hear some feedback from others as to where their best practices, or maybe some resources that we could have access to online.
I'll jump in. So as far as our rental agreement, when we developed that, we looked at our kind of neighboring in our state, other people that had similar complexes, and looked at what they were doing. Same way that we would kind of set pricing. You look at similar facilities and things like that, and look at what you have to offer and base pricing on that. As far as the prep, and it's something that we might be able to look at, is we truly handle everything, even for a practice. So we do make sure that the field is dragged. We set the bases according to what the rental agreement says they need the bases set at for the age group. So we handle all that ahead of time. I'm actually our on-site person for all practices and games Monday through Friday. So in the event that our maintenance crew messes something up, I've got access to all the tools where I can go and I can change the bases where they're set at. We're a little bit more finicky. We actually don't have any volunteer access to anything. Park is 10 years old, so we've kind of, to a certain extent, I guess you could say, babied it, where our maintenance staff is doing all the work to it, or myself. So that's how we've kind of operated, which has got a unique set of challenges, like I mentioned earlier with my question about trying to drag fields in between games and things like that. But it's gotten a good response as far as the customer service aspect of, like Drew has said with some other things, of you can get, if you've got our field rented for practice, you can get there 5 minutes before, and the field's going to be ready to go, or while your kids are stretching and throwing, warming up, I'm going to be there if something's wrong that needs to be corrected, to take care of it before you need on the field, before you're using the bases, things along those lines. So we've gotten great feedback from a customer service standpoint, because our rental fees are fairly low, but you get quite a bit of prep for it in terms of that. And then having people on site all day when we do have tournaments and things like that has generally gotten good feedback for some of the things you mentioned as far as emptying trash and things like that as well. It's never an issue because we've got people there throughout the day where if anything arises or if a field becomes unplayable, we've got people there that can handle that for them. We also have people when we get rain, things like that, where we're not trusting a volunteer or even a tournament director who's solely focused necessarily on the revenue monetary side for him. If we get a downpour and we know that we've got water coming up under our feet as we walk through the field, not just standing water, it gives us kind of that sense of security of being able to make a call and say, hey, we can't play, let's try and get the water off and see what we can do, which we've had issues with in the past of just kind of opening it up and having nobody there. And we come in and find grass is dead and all kinds of issues from where it rained for 2 hours straight nonstop and they just tried to play right through it. And so we've had some interesting challenges that have kind of led to us being a little bit more selective of who does the field work and things along those lines.
So Nathan, just to follow up on that, some of those damages and things in your contracts, do you charge for those damages and the extra time that is required, or is that something that you kind of maybe build that in that you almost know people are going to do that, or how do you handle that?
We do have a clause in the rental agreement that we can. I believe since I've been here, we have not exercised it. Generally, it's to the point where we have the materials on hand to fix the issue, whether we like to necessarily, or it might take some extra time, of course, is the bigger issue there. But so we've got the clause in there where if it were something severe, or if a good example is we've had people damage fencing and things like that, and that's more where we'll exercise it. But if it's normal wear and tear, or a kid runs out on a field that's not playable or something like that, in my mind as a baseball person, as a sports guy, those are things that are going to happen over time because everybody wants to play and we want them to be able to play. Now that said, kind of like the car on the field, there's always going to be a potential not great decision that we don't like, but so we've got the clause in there absolutely where we can bill for damages, or it's also built into the agreement that we can say, hey, you damaged something, we're not going to make you pay for it, but you can't use the field anymore. You're no longer able to rent with us. So we've got all that built in, absolutely.
Yeah, I remember doing events for the student union, and all of our language was very loose in the sense that we didn't say we will do things, but we reserve the right to, or we can, or may, and that way it does allow a opportunity to be understanding in certain situations, and you're not always, well, we have to penalize them now. So that's a very good point.
Brian, I got a fun story for you guys that led to the creation of our product. And we had a dad that was a CrossFit dad that got first base stuck in the ground. And I'm sure you guys run into this all the time, but he yanked out that anchor, pulling that base out, and it looked like a bomb went off at first base. How long does that take you guys to fix?
Rebecca, maybe you can chime in on that, fixing a dugout anchor or a blown out anchor.
Good or not. There we go. Mike, you live there. To fix a blown out anchor, was that the question?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I kind of sounds like that's Drew's wheelhouse, but if I was using a traditional metal sleeve, generally we would have a handful of them set like in a small plastic bucket, and the sleeve would protrude from the top of the bucket and it would be cemented in. right? So it's pretty easy to, and the other ones that are in the ground have that. There's no risk, no, you know, safety issues, because only the sleeve is, you know, protruding about 4 inches or so. So it's nothing anybody can get hurt on, but we would have spares of those. So if something got knocked completely cattywampus, or I needed an actual replacement because it got misshapen or something, you can pull one out of the shed, pound nails, pull string, I don't know, start to finish, 45 minutes. Definitely not ideal, but my bigger question would be, do you have somebody on site who can perform that? There's no volunteers that are going to be able to do that. And I'll jump on board with Nathan 100%. From a maintenance and management perspective, I never want to volunteer to touch my fields, ever. I mean, ever do I want to volunteer to touch the fields. Now, it's not reasonable to think in a Parks and Recreation situation that you're not going to have to use volunteers, but I want to reduce the amount that we have to use volunteers as much as possible, because as field and parks managers, we're the ones with the skills. Yes, we can do some training, but youth athletic associations, leadership participation turns over so frequently that, oh yeah, we'd love to have training. I could spend all of my time training at the level that people come and go. I'm lucky if somebody lasts a whole season, or maybe a couple, till they finally get sort of skilled enough to be working on fields, and then their kids move on or to a different sport or to a different age group, and all that training is gone with that volunteer. So keeping training simple, focused, and just to the basics is the best way for field owners to, you know, interface with volunteers. Keep the tasks that we use volunteers for very specific, very trainable, very repeatable, and very easy, and keep the more complex things for in-house staff, because volunteers come and go so frequently. Yeah, I know that's a little bit off topic, but maybe 45 minutes to replace a base anchor, and the rest was just me rambling.
No, that's a really great point, though, and maybe some things. What do you suggest is that minimal maintenance that we can rely on some of those volunteers? What kind of tasks would that be? Just the brushing of the fields, or I mean, even having them dragging in between? Is that something that is not suggested, or is that an okay thing because it's simple enough?
Again, it depends on who the volunteers are. If you play on our facilities, if you're a youth athletic association that's associated with the township or the school, and you're going to be there every single week, week after week, month after month, season after season, we're going to invest in more equipment, more sophisticated tasks, that sort of thing. If you're a user group who shows up occasionally for a tournament or uses our facilities a half dozen times a year, don't touch anything, come back next year, right? So long-term volunteers or regular volunteers, community volunteers who are going to be around, those are the ones for us worth putting training into. And then we can go as simple or as complex as you want. Yes, a walk behind drag, it's the only thing I'm putting in a volunteer's hand, and maybe a rake. That's it. But we can get a little bit more complex. We worked out a system where I managed fields, where me as the representative for the field owners for the municipality worked with the Youth Athletic Association leadership, many of them, and then they could therefore trickle down what they'd learned to their individual coaches, field managers, and that sort of thing. So we had mandatory training every single year, where home plate repairs, pitching mound repairs, all the position repairs, and a general dragging is what we focused on, so that after a game, the coach who had been trained, right, could sort of dispatch his team of 10, 12, sometimes there's 15 or 20 kids on a team, depending on the age group. Within 10 to 15 minutes, each kid knew their position, what they had to do in that position to get the field completely ready for the next game. And the outfielders presumably didn't have anything to do. They were responsible for litter, garbage, and any lost and found items around. So, I mean, it's a well-oiled, well-executed machine, but that went between the Youth Athletic Association and the field ownership. And again, a tournament group that shows up, I'm not training you for anything and you're not allowed to touch anything.
So those are some very good points in that it is about relationships. It is about collaboration and communication and setting those expectations of, are you just an end client? Then we're here to serve you, as opposed to, are we partners on this amenity? And we're taking care of it because it's something we value. And so, yeah, and especially in today's society, there is a big difference between I'm here paying for this, serve me, or I need to take care of this because it's the longevity of our community's capital investment, if you will. So we're coming towards the end of our time slot here. Are there any examples that people would like to share of good practices that they have found so far, or even horror stories, kind of like Drew's pulling a concrete can out of the ground situation? Anyone want to jump in? Perhaps Dan, did you have anything you wanted to add before we sign off? I don't know if you have the capability to jump in or not. All right.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can now.
Okay, great. Sorry for the delay.
No worries.
First off, thanks to you, BK, for keeping topics relevant here with respect to PPMI and our workshops. Drew, well done presentation there. I think the topic is very relevant. I think now to answer your question, BK, horror stories versus good practices or best management practices. I'll stay away from the horror stories because then we just get into, we're wasting everybody's time because we've all got the horror stories. The only thing with regard to best management practices I can say, and I think it goes back to Rebecca talking about training, and it does become difficult with training when your staff continues, whether it be your staff or your volunteers, turnover. But I would say with best management practices, pick one thing, focus on it, and do it right. If it's something as simple as just stringing a line, we want to make sure that we string the line the proper way. Everybody thinks it's stringing a line. Number one, that the type of string is important, the quality of string that you use, and then when you do anchor it from your outfield foul poles and work back to your baselines, again, it's as simple as it sounds to string a line. You want to make sure you're doing things the right way. That string has got to be tight. The nail has got to be in properly. The string has got to be lined up on the outside of the foul line when you're stringing lines, even painting lines. I mean, how many people do we see string right over the middle of a line and pick it up, and there's either chalk or paint that you're carrying to the outer edge? So I think my comment here, BK, is find one. There's numerous things we can do when we're talking about pregame infields, but find one thing and focus on it and do it right. And then hopefully you can find some quality people to carry out that, and that will give you the opportunity to move on to the next thing and do that right. So more quality, I think, than quantity. And that goes back to Drew talking about people will pay for a quality field if it's done the right way.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you. I want to thank everyone for participating today. I want to please reach out to me. I put my email in the chat box, but you can also find us on our website, prps.org, Maintenance Institute. We are going towards our subscription launch here on October 1st, so we will no longer be a free resource, but we will still continue to offer webinars, viewing for free, but the CEUs are going to be included if you're a subscriber. We also will be allowing access to subscribers to the database, and we've been sharing all of our resources and some of the checklists and all the templates that we've been collecting from folks, and we're keeping that in our database so that we can find more and continuously grow and create a best practice network for people to lean upon. I invite you to reach out, let me know what you need to know, because it helps me expand what we have to offer by answering specific questions like, how can we train our coaches? How can we create opportunities for people to learn those simple tasks to move forward? So again, thank you for your participation. I also want to make sure that I thank our sponsors. Toro is helping us, and we have 3 distributors here in Pennsylvania that are helping us get off the ground and move forward, getting Institute events out there. And eventually, when COVID does go away, we will have, once again, in-person trainings, and we will create more field days and workshops. I'm also working towards creating a Pennsylvania maintenance rodeo. So look for that as we move forward. I want to thank Drew for participating with us today. I want to thank Nathan and Dan for sharing, and Rebecca is gone, but thank you to Rebecca for her contributions as well today. I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and we will take all of Drew's slides and I will put that on our site, and we can also share that with you. Feel free, put your email in the chat box there, and I will make sure I get you a copy of the recording as well as all the resources that we talked about today. I will also send out a final survey so you have an opportunity to get a CEU credit if that is something that you need right now for a certification. Thank you again, BK from the Pennsylvania Park Maintenance Institute. Drew, do you have anything you would like to say in closure?
No, thanks for having me. And our website's thebasebuddy.com. Feel free to reach out, and we'd love to work with your facilities.
So have a great day, everyone, and thank you for participating.